Welcome to FOXSOUL's Black Report. This is the space where we bring you Black America's headline news, views, and opinions. I'm Romeo.
I'm Brooke.
I'm Demi.
Peace and love, soulmates. I'm Nielle.
All right, on today's report, opening statements have begun in the trial against Travis and Gregory McMichael and their neighbor, Roddy Bryan. They're all accused in Ahmaud Arbery's killing. We're also talking voting rights and what's next on Capitol Hill.
The FBI says white supremacists were recorded plotting terror attacks in Virginia. A Michigan treasurer is under fire for calling a black CFO a boy. And after 196 years, a college grants tenure to a black professor.
Unbelievable. Soulmates. We have that and so much more because it's our voice and our truth. So let's get to it.
Good evening, soulmates. It is Friday, the end of the first week of November, which also marked the very beginning of the trial against three white men accused of killing jogger, black man, Ahmaud Arbery. Opening statements started this morning, drawing the nation's attention to an incredibly small town in Georgia, a case in which race has continued to be a central factor. The jurors, 11 white jurors, 1 black juror. They were sworn in this morning, tasked with deciding whether Gregory McMichael, his son Travis McMichael, and their neighbor, William Roddy Bryan Jr., are guilty of malice and felony murder in connection with Arbery's shooting. They're also facing charges of aggravated assault, false imprisonment, and criminal attempt to commit false imprisonment. All have pleaded not guilty. Prosecutor Linda Dunikoski told the jurors this in her opening statement.
We are here because of assumptions and driveway decisions. A very wise person once said, "Don't assume the worst of another person's intentions until you actually know what's going on with them. Don't assume the worst with what they intend to do." But in this case, all three of these defendants did everything they did based on assumptions. Not on facts, not on evidence, on assumptions. And they made decisions in their driveways based on those assumptions that took a young man's life.
So, you know, the McMichaels and William Roddy Bryan, all say that this was self-defense, right? Their lawyers are calling this self-defense. Essentially, one of the McMichaels is saying that, I want to say Travis is saying that he shot Ahmaud Arbery in self-defense because he was trying to make a citizen's arrest based on break-ins that were happening in the neighborhood. So he was accusing him of break-ins and going to arrest him based on that. The prosecutor notes that on the video, one of them can be heard saying, "I'm going to kill you. I will kill you." So I think there's a larger conversation to be had, and there's an op-ed in the LA Times actually bringing this to a point. There's a larger discussion to be had about vigilantism, right? And so often you've heard people say, you know, well, what happens if we don't have police? We're going to have Superman and Batman and Annie, Joe, and John are going to be out there behaving as such. The thing is, that's already happening. Mm-hmm. Not only is that already happening, but in certain instances, it appears law enforcement is supporting that. Because I want to tie in Kyle Rittenhouse's trial as well with this, because the central, I think, defense in both of these cases is that someone says, hey, I found people doing something wrong. I was armed with a deadly weapon, with a gun, and I went to basically police the area. I, not a police officer, went to police the area. And in this instance, one of them called the district attorney to say, hey, help me out with this. Mm-hmm. In the other instance, before, while he's walking through the area, he's traveled to this area, back to Rittenhouse, traveled to Kenosha, Wisconsin, across state lines with his weapon to protect the neighborhood, to protect the city. Police officers thanked him for his service and offered him water. And so I do think that there's a larger conversation that we're not necessarily having right now because, yeah, most importantly here is people lost their lives. Yeah. And these are very important trials that we need to continue to see go about. But what's next for that? You know what I mean?
Yeah, and for me, I know we wanted to get to this point so the trial can start, but it's so frustrating when you do that because you got to hear their side. This luxurious neighborhood, I'm sorry, that everyone wants to be a part of, want to be in. He had no business there. He was on probation. Like, these are things that does not matter. And I'm going to tell you why, because even professional police, if they're chasing a car, they'll fall back, right? Most of the time, that's what they'll fall back and do, and they'll see what happens or they'll let things develop. In this case, if you were really curious about what was going on with him in your neighborhood, you could have called the police. Yeah, if you wanted to, like, maybe follow him in a distant array, fine. Did you have to have a shotgun? Did you have to threaten his life? And I'm glad that it's so important that audio was on there where they were saying, I'm going to kill you, right? Because that's very, very strong. And that plays a part in, like, no, you were not just neighboring him. You were threatening. You were threatening this man for no reason. None at all.
And you know what, to be fair,
yeah,
you're right. Many police officers, and they are trained, to do what's safest to fall back. Some will continue to chase at an unsafe speed and hit an unsuspecting victim. Some will tip the car they're chasing with their vehicle. Some will crash right into it, and some will shoot out of a moving vehicle.
I think the word assumption that the district attorney used was very powerful, because that is an example of what white privilege is in this country. White people have the opportunity to assume things and victimize people of color, versus people of color, they have to be 100% right when something happens. So I thought that she did a good job at that, but I am still cautiously optimistic about this trial based upon the makeup of the juror and just what it is to be black in America when we look at trials and how black people and people of color are victimized in this country.
I'm very nervous about this trial. I won't say I'm just nervous, just plain out nervous. Both of you guys, both Brooke and Romy, you guys brought up him saying that he was going to kill him. The moment that he says that, this is a situation about race. And then, Neil, back to your point about white supremacy, white power, them using their authority to have white power in this situation. Like you said, the juror, 11 jurors being white is very scary. And also the judge, a lot of people online today and the last few days have been saying that the judge could do something about this. I don't know how much of that is actually true, but the judge did admit that they used intentional discrimination with these jurors. And so when you say cautiously, Neil, I'm very cautious and nervous about how this trial is going to turn out as well, although we know how it should turn out.
Right. Let's move to our next story. General Colin Powell, the late former Secretary of State and Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman, was honored today at a private funeral service at the Washington National Cathedral. Now, Powell died October 18th, if you recall, from complications from COVID-19. He was 84. Now, family and friends and numerous military and congressional leaders attended Powell's funeral, including President Joe Biden, who recently just returned from an international trip, and First Lady Jill Biden, along with former President Barack Obama, First Lady Michelle Obama, former President George W. Bush, and former First Lady Laura Bush. And also in attendance was former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. Now, the ceremony was closed to the public, but it was on every channel this morning. And what it brought back and recalled to my memory is what America used to be like. It's not about politics or party, but you put country first. So to see the former presidents all together today, seeing Republicans and Democrats just unified with somebody that was the perfect example of what a statesman should be was just beautiful. And the fact that he was an African-American man and was able to bring white and black people together for such a solemn moment, it was a beautiful thing to see. And I think it was a reminder of what our country should get back to where no matter if you're Republican, Democrat, Independent, Green Party, there is a common ground that we can get to for the United States of America.
Yeah, this absolutely was everywhere today. A couple of notable families, of course, the Bidens, the Obamas, the Bushes, Hillary Clinton was there. And so his son said something very powerful because, of course, when Colin Powell died, the first thing everyone said, okay, well, who's going to be the next person to take over? Who's going to be the next Colin Powell to kind of come through? And his son said, the example of Colin Powell does not call on us pretty much to emulate his resume. So he's not saying that there needs to be a next person, but more so well emulate his character. Neo, you talked about that, his character and his example of a human being. And you were literally just talking about him being a human being, being a black man. So I thought that was just really powerful to focus more on the good, of course, than the bad right now in a situation like this. So yeah, I thought that was really powerful.
Yeah, a black man has accomplished a lot. And I think Neil said it best. Like, you know, we even have Democrats that can't agree on all these things with the bills we're trying to push through, right? But at the end of the day, it's important that we all show up and show respect for each other at times like this. And there was one particular president that was not there, that we all know that, but that's a whole different thing. All right, now let's go inside politics. Several corporations that publicly declared their support for legislation to strengthen the Voting Rights Act have donated thousands of dollars this year to Republicans who recently blocked the bill in the state, a new analysis found. Accountable U.S., a watchdog group, found that 8 major corporations that signed a letter in July calling for passage of the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act of 2021 have collectively donated $164,500 to GOP senators who voted this week against allowing debate on the measure. The companies include household names like Amazon, Dell, Microsoft, and Facebook, according to NBC News. So they jump ship, then they get back on, like, what is the reason for this? What is the strategy of all this, right? Because we see them saying, look, what you're doing is not right, so we want to take a stand. Is that to look good to the country, to the human eye, to us? And then now, are they getting back on board because they feel like they can see a switch that could happen maybe with the midterms or with the new election coming up? I don't know. I'm confused about this, but who can we trust when we see things like this?
Right. I mean, that's the question. That's always the hardcore question, right? Because this is nothing new at all. Companies often have, you know, a public stance, a very public stance, and they're speaking to their consumers. They're speaking to their customers. They're speaking to the people who help them make money, right? And then sometimes some companies, where their money goes is different, contradicts their public statements, and they're speaking to who helps them protect their money. And that is always the question, you know, why does this happen? How often does this happen? Who's involved when this happens?
You know, Romeo, I'm glad that you asked, who do we trust? Because this is why every time we see a stance from a company that's like, we're standing up against discrimination to the black community, I'm always giving you a side eye, because I always have it in the back of my mind like, are you really here for us? Or is this something to make sure that you sell more products? I mean, honestly, like, how much money do we spend on Amazon sending $22,000, Dell not so much, but Facebook donating $26,000, apps that we're on all the time, and places that we frequent, websites that we frequent. This is very scary to know that they can put out all of this language that is positive for the black community, and Brooke, like you said, to help them sell more products, help the consumers, us buy into, you know, what they're selling, but deep down you really are against us.
I mean, I think it's both. We know that African Americans are the #1 consumers in this country. And so they did this in response to the voting rights bill that happened in Georgia, right? So they did that, which was commendable. But at the same time, these companies work with these Republican lawmakers to have laws passed that are beneficial to their bottom line. We're talking about taxes, we're talking about regulations and things of that nature. And I'll give you a quick example. A lot of times these companies send lobbyists up to Capitol Hill. They will literally write the bill. And sometimes these lawmakers are so lazy that they forget to take the letterhead off the bill, and they submit it to the floor. I mean, they've been exposed a few times for lawmakers submitting a bill to the floor, and it still has the company's letterhead at the top. So I think, you know, it's both for them, because we know in business it's all about transactions. So they want to keep their business happening in a way that is affordable and to where they make money, but they also want to please their consumers as well. And so now the question the question is posed back to the consumers: how do you want to respond to this? Do you want to support these companies, or do you not, and send a message to them?
Let's move on and talk about Texas a bit here. So the Justice Department is suing the state of Texas and Secretary of State John Scott over a recently passed voting and elections law known as SB 1, alleging the law will disenfranchise eligible Texas citizens who seek to exercise their right to vote. Also will exacerbate the challenges that they face in exercising their fundamental right to vote. Now, the lawsuit announced yesterday on Thursday said Texas Texas's decision to amend the type of assistance voters who require help while voting or cannot read or write receive at the polls, as well as changing rules regarding the rejection of mail ballots over immaterial errors or omissions violate the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act. I was actually really happy to hear this because, I mean, it just seems like the state of Texas is kind of running amok with so much going on that it was kind of good to see the DOJ push back. I mean, even a little bit. We're talking about it here because it just seems like the state of Texas really can just do whatever they want, and no one has any protections, and I really would be terrified to live in Texas right now.
You know what's interesting? The two lawsuits, right, going to the state of Georgia and here in Texas, not here in Texas, the state of Texas, here in this story in Texas, the federal government's legal strategies in both completely differ, right? In Georgia, they're saying, hey, listen, this law was put in place and it illegally targets black voters, and we want to protect their right to vote. Demi just broke down what this lawsuit says, but the New York Times points out that if you put the two lawsuits together and the very public statements, because that's a really big important part of it, the New York Times reporters say that it all indicates the department is in its intent on using the legal tools at its disposal to oppose Republican voting restrictions.
When you think about this, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No,
Neil.
you go ahead, Romeo.
Well, I was going to say, when you think about 24-hour voting, or or the drive-through, how people were excited about that, and the reason why, because there was always a complaint saying we don't get out and vote enough. You live in this country, you should go vote. People went out and vote. It happened.
Right.
It was successful. All of a sudden, they want to take all of that away. And I have family and friends that live in Texas, and they just say they just wilding out down there. They just said they don't even know what's going on in this state. They feel like they're in a country on their own because of all the laws and the bills they're trying to put before them and what's happening in that state. So it's a lot of work to be done, but it's sad to see them still, try and fight back on this. But I'm glad that someone's standing up saying, hey, wait a minute, we got to do something different.
Yeah, I really think that, I think this is great, just like I think that we're trying to pass laws on Capitol Hill. But I think this country is really coming back to a time like in the 1960s with the Voting Rights Bill, is that the power is going to come from the people. And it's really going to take the soulmates, the community, the people at large to really demand what they want to see happen on Capitol Hill. It's going to take more than just voting these people in. At this point, it's going to take voting some of these people out.
Yeah.
Let's move on to our next story. On the same topic of voting rights, Congressmember Terry Sewell hosted the Black Women's Roundtable. This happened yesterday. It was a bit of a congressional briefing on voting rights and economic justice happening in D.C. Participants discussed the status of the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act and the Build Back Better agenda, and got a bit of an update from state leaders on the impact of voter suppression in their respective states following Tuesday's big election. Also, after the briefing, Representative Sewell joined Melanie Campbell of the Black Women's Roundtable and the National Coalition on Black Civic Participation for a speak out on voting rights and economic justice in front of the Supreme Court. Black women just barely, if you look at, the history of our earth, right? The history of voting, of our country, the history of that, Black women just barely got the right to vote, really, in the grand scheme of things, if you really look at it, and have never taken their foot off the gas when it comes to trying their hardest and speaking out and fighting to ensure everybody's right to go to that ballot.
Right. Melanie Campbell was supposed to join us today, but she is still on Capitol Hill fighting at this very moment right now. So, like I say, I'm putting my trust in the people like the Black Women's Roundtable, like Higher Heights, like Black Voters Matter, because they are really on the ground pushing this narrative. They are mobilizing communities, and they are coalition building and organizers, just like they did in the 1960s, Dr. King, Dorothy Heights, the NAACP, the Urban League, the Pullman Porters. It took everybody to come together and say, hey, enough is enough. We have to make this happen. So once again, I'm glad that they're on Capitol Hill, but I think that the change is going to come from the people, the constituents, the voters of the United States to make this change.